Good morning and a very warm welcome to this edition of CCTV News, live from Beijing. I'm Zaka Jacob. We start in Egypt, where protesters have broken into a building which houses the Israeli embassy in Cairo. Now, they gathered there to protest against the killing of 5 Egyptian soldiers by Israeli forces. That happened on the 18th of August at the border between both countries. Now, what happened in Cairo is that, according to official MENA news agency in Egypt, some protesters threw confidential documents from one of the embassy's offices. Protesters also set some police cars on fire. You can take a look at those pictures there. The cops did their best to try and disperse the crowds using tear gas. As many as 160 people, we're told, are injured. This as the protesters tried to tear down parts of the wall around the embassy. Meanwhile, we're getting in latest reports from Cairo that the Israeli ambassador to Egypt, his family and the embassy staff there have arrived at the Cairo airport. They're apparently there to fly out of the country. Local sources at the airport say the ambassador and his entourage travelled to the airport under heavy security, and they've been waiting there for a flight out. Meanwhile, Egypt is not the only country witnessing protests. Tens of thousands took to the streets in Yemen's major cities, calling for decisive action to oust the country's longtime president, Ali Abdullah Saleh. Now, rallies took place after Friday prayers in several cities. This came amid heavy deployment of government forces. Protesters have been basically calling for rapid and decisive action to settle the unrest and unseat President Saleh. However, his supporters say they're waiting for President Saleh to return from Saudi Arabia. They've been chanting slogans demanding the president stay in power until his term expires in 2013. Now, on Wednesday, the ruling party extended a 90-day transitional period for President Saleh to resign based on a deal brokered by other Gulf countries. But the opposition rejected that straight away. They simply want the president to sign the deal first, hand over power to his deputy, and then begin talking. Meanwhile, it's getting tougher in Syria, according to an opposition official, for the prospects of dialogue in that country are looking extremely bleak. In fact, he's called it pretty much a dead end. Amar Kurabi, he's the head of the National Organization for Human Rights in Syria. He made these comments on Friday amidst those pictures, tens of thousands once again getting out in the streets of Syria. This came even as the Russian presidential envoy to the Middle East was meeting with a senior Syrian official in Moscow. Protesters are not letting up. This Friday, just like many others, after Friday prayers, tens of thousands came out of the streets demanding President Bashar al-Assad step down. Activists said as many as 3 people were killed as large crowds marched in the city of Homs and Deir al-Zor. Meanwhile, Russia is one of the few countries to steadfastly stand behind Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Now, Russian President Dmitry Medvedev has reiterated his belief in talks as simply the only way to resolve the crisis in Syria. His remarks came as the Syrian opposition is calling on Russia to support their protests against the Assad regime.
We are ready to support different approaches, but they must not be based on one-sided condemnations on the actions by the government of President Assad. They must send a firm signal to all conflicting sides that they need to sit down at the negotiating table.
Well, to Libya now, where the final assault has begun. Rebel fighters have launched attacks on Muammar Gaddafi's last remaining bastions. We're getting in latest reports from Libya, where fighting is reported inside the town of Bani Walid and near Gaddafi's hometown of Sirte. In fact, the battles in these 2 towns broke out just a day before a deadline set by the NTC for these 2 towns to surrender or simply face the onslaught. Su Yuting has the latest.
Libyan fighters say they're clashing with Muammar Gaddafi's supporters inside the town of Bani Walid. Some field commanders suspect Gaddafi himself or his sons might be hiding inside. An estimated 150 loyalists are under siege by the NTC forces there. Earlier, supporters of the ousted Libyan leader fired rockets at rebel positions outside the city. Casualties have been taken away from the front line in the past few hours.
They fired rocket grad on the highway, this highway, and revolutionary they went to protect that. and they discovered that there are a lot of snipers, so they want to clear them off, and they engaged with them, and we have 1 fatality in our side and 3 in other side, and there are about 4 injury on both sides.
Meanwhile, an NTC spokesman says battles have begun outside Sirte in response to barrages of rockets fired by pro-Gaddafi forces. Sirte, along with Bani Walid, are the main areas still in the control of Gaddafi loyalists. NTC officials say the outbreaks of fighting mean the ceasefire has effectively been scrapped. This would pave the way for the final battles of the 6-month civil war. Su Yuting, CCTV.
And even as the fighting begins there in Bani Walid and in Sirte, we're getting in reports from neighboring Niger, where a convoy of vehicles believed to be carrying Gaddafi officials left the northern town of Agadez on Friday. Now, according to Reuters, the group is heading towards the country's capital, Niamey, where a meeting is being scheduled between Gaddafi's camp and Libya's rebels. Now, this convoy was seen getting fuel near the Etoile de Tenir hotel. It's a hotel owned by Gaddafi. His generals have been staying there for a while now. Niger is now under increasing international pressure to hand over Gaddafi's former officials. Meanwhile, Libya's interim justice minister says ousted leader Muammar Gaddafi will face justice within Libya as soon as he's captured by the rebel forces. Speaking from Tripoli on Friday evening, Mohammed al-Alaghi suggested that Gaddafi will face Libyan justice that's in line with international norms. The UN Secretary-General's special advisor to Libya on the post-conflict planning there, Ian Martin, said on Friday that the Security Council is starting discussions on a proposed UN support mission to Libya. Mr. Martin said that the outlined plan sets a potential operation, but the Security Council has the final say in determining the mission's actual mandate. He also said it's vital to promote national reconciliation in Libya, and that's in a bid to try and ease the conflict there.
Everybody agrees that it needs to be as inclusive a set of national authorities as possible. And of course there's going to be a good deal of negotiation among the Libyans as to what that means in practice. But they've shown considerable capacity to negotiate with each other, and I trust that that will be reflected in, before one gets to elections, which of course is what ultimately must convey legitimacy, that initially there'll be agreement on interim inclusive authorities.
Welcome back. China says it's got confidence in both Europe's economy and in the euro, and supports the eurozone's efforts in trying to tackle its debt crisis. Vice Premier Wang Qishan made these remarks during his ongoing visit to the United Kingdom. Wang co-chaired the 4th annual China-UK Economic and Financial Dialogue with Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer, George Osborne. Now, both sides agreed to boost cooperation in trade and investment. They also signed memoranda of understanding on a wide range of issues like infrastructure and energy cooperation. Mr. Wang also pledged China's support to the Eurozone to deal with its sovereign debt crisis. The Vice Premier is also urging the UK to support Chinese investment in that country and encourage the European Union to relax control over high-tech exports to China. Meanwhile, China's central bank governor, Zhou Xiaochuan, said that that China welcomes London's interest in becoming an offshore trading centre for the yuan. But he said the internationalization of the Chinese currency is a long-term process. The Chinese delegation also met with British Prime Minister David Cameron. They also visited London's Olympic Stadium for the 2012 Games. Wang Qishan is also expected to give a speech to students at Oxford. Now, financial leaders from the world's most developed economies have pledged to find a balance between reining in budget deficits on the one hand and supporting economic growth on the other. Now, this pledge comes as threats have been mounting to the world's economic recovery, both in the US and in Europe. Now, this consensus was reached on Friday night at a meeting of the G7 finance ministers and central bank governors in Paris. Now, at a press conference held after that meeting, French Finance Minister François Baroin said that G7 members must tread the difficult path of achieving fiscal adjustment plans on the one hand, while at the same time supporting economic activity. He also said the finance officials agreed that they need to set out ambitious and growth-friendly fiscal consolidation plans to try and narrow unsustainable debt. Meanwhile, this is indicative and it's a big blow to the ECB's plans to try and deal with Europe's debt problems. ECB Executive Board member Jürgen Stark is resigning from his post. Sources are saying this is a protest against the bank's policy of buying back bonds to try and help troubled economies like Spain and Italy. Now, Mr. Stark's successor, we're told, will be appointed before the end of the year.
Jürgen Stark has become the second policymaker to resign from the European Central Bank in a year. Sources have told Reuters the chief economist is stepping down because of a conflict over the bank's controversial bond buying program, which recently rescued Spain and Italy from the brink of disaster, even though the bank said Stark was leaving for personal reasons. Axel Weber also quit the ECB in February because he opposed the bond program. German traders reacted nervously to the news. Robert Harver is from Baader Bank.
Now we have also a high level of uncertainty considering money policy at the ECB. That's not good news for the German stock exchange market.
Stark has been on the board since June 2006. His term was due to expire in May 2014. German Deputy Finance Minister Jörg Asmussen is expected to replace the 63-year-old by the end of the year. European shares were down 2.5% when markets closed.
Let's just give you an idea of just how bad it is. Let's take you to Greece now, which is one of the worst hit of all the plagued euro economies. The economic crisis there has now generated a new homeless generation. Up to 17%, we're told, have become unemployed. Some of them come from even middle and higher educational backgrounds. Many of them now are living on the streets.
This is where Kostas Papatheodorou spends his days since losing his job. Papatheodorou worked in construction in Athens for 27 years. Now, aged 55, he is homeless.
My house caught fire, then a huge wave of unemployment came. Now my home is wherever I roam.
Kostas' story is far from unique. A non-government organisation called Klimaka provides services for the homeless. It says over the past 2 years, the number of homeless has increased by 25%. It estimates as many as 20,000 people live on the streets. Traditional homeless are generally immigrants, drug addicts or the mentally ill. But since the start of the economic crisis, Klimaka's psychologist Aris Violatsis says the picture has changed.
The new homeless generation, the new homeless, are homeless particularly for financial reasons. They are people who are unemployed. They do come from middle and higher educational background. They used to have an adequate lifestyle. They were satisfied, they were content with their lives.
Klimaka's voluntary workers talk to the homeless every day. They say people aged between 45 and 60 who have lost their jobs or businesses and have no family are the most likely to lose their homes. They blame the economic crisis, which plunged Greece deep into recession. Unemployment is currently at around 17%. And with tough austerity measures being introduced to reduce the country's debt, it's feared more and more people could end up like Kostas.
On to the other side of the Atlantic now, where US President Barack Obama seems all charged up after his new jobs plan. On Friday, he chose Majority House Leader Eric Cantor's district of Virginia as his first stop to try and rally public support behind his new jobs plan. Now, it came a day after he presented the $450 billion proposal before a joint session of Congress. Now, the trip to the University of Virginia in Richmond was the first of many expected efforts by the president to try and rally public support for his initiative. There were about 9,000 students listening to a rather charged-up Obama. He told thousands of them that their voices will make a difference in getting the plan through a divided Congress. Obama's urging voters to support his new jobs plan and pressure lawmakers to pass it and pass it right away.
I want you to tell your congressperson the time for gridlock and games is over. The time for action is now. The time to create jobs is now. Pass this bill. If you want construction workers on the work site, pass this bill. If you want teachers in the classroom, pass this bill. You want small business owners to hire new people, pass this bill. You want veterans to get their fair share of opportunity that they helped create, pass this bill.
Well, he suddenly seems to have found his spring back, hasn't he? President Obama. Meanwhile, Defense Secretary Leon Panetta has thanked local Virginia police and firefighters there for their work during the September 11th attacks on the Pentagon. Panetta says the U.S. has become stronger, in his opinion, as a result. There were 189 people inside the Pentagon building when a plane crashed into it on September the 11th.
The people who attacked us on 9/11 were trying to weaken